Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back again talking about North Carolina. And I think kind of the big question that a lot of us have, if you've been following along with what's happened with flounder and trout and just all the regulations, this question is, is the fisheries management system completely broken? Like, what is going on? I've been following it. I posted a video of just kind of my candid thoughts from what I've read and watched. And it's tough to tell who is necessarily at fault, right? Some people are blaming commissioners and some people are blaming lobbyists and commercial fishing and recreational fishermen. It's just, there's a lot of blame being pointed. And at least from what I've seen, one of the most helpful YouTube channels out there has been my guest here, Steve Brewster, also known as Fishing with Brewski. And I love the way that, one, he's actually done the research. He's taken the time to read. He's taken the time to make phone calls and really get down to the truth of what's happening. And so I wanted to bring Steve on. He reached out to me via email. I was like, dude, I got to get you on the podcast and just talk about all of the things that are happening, both behind the scenes and right in front of our faces. The big one that kind of hit the news was that essentially flounder season was done for recreational anglers in the year 2024. So that got a lot of people ticked off, rightfully so. If you're a recreational angler, you had paid money to have a license, and now all of a sudden being told that you're not allowed to keep a single one, something just didn't feel right. So welcome to the show, Steve. I'm pumped to hear a lot bit more about what's happening there in North Carolina. Do you mind just kind of starting off with, maybe who you are and kind of how this got you kind of excited and maybe angered, and then let's talk about just some of the bigger problems that's facing the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Steve Brewster. I run the YouTube channel Fishing with Brewski, and I joined the Marine Corps when I was 19 years old. I actually grew up in Northwest Georgia. I did not grow up on the coast. Used to have family trips down to Gulf Shores and like Mobile Bay area with my family. So I had a little bit of saltwater growing up, but I've loved fishing more than anything else in the world since I was about 5 years old. It's my absolute favorite thing to do. Yep. I do it with my kids now. So joining the Marine Corps when I was 19 took me to North Carolina. And that's where I really got my first introduction to saltwater. It was in about 2005. And since then, over time, if you've lived in North Carolina, we've seen a tremendous decline over that time. And that's what really gets us here. So when you want to talk about, is the system broken or not? Well, if you have a fisheries management system where you have a year where there is no flounder season, your fisheries management plan has failed as much as it possibly can, with the exception of actually driving a species to extinction, to which North Carolina can just about claim that. We're very close. We have several species that are considered depleted. Gray trout, stripers. Stripers are actually extinct in 3 of our 4 river systems now. There are no more native-born fish. Atlantic sturgeon are on the endangered species list, and they're still dying in some of these gears that are being used that probably should not be out there anymore. As far as who is to blame exactly, the biggest thing that I've highlighted in my videos is the political influence from, and it's not commercial fishermen, right? So our regular everyday commercial fishermen don't have anything to do with this any more than you or I do. They just go out and they do what they are allowed to do, trying to make a living. Sometimes within the law, sometimes not within the law. But again, that's, rec guys do the same thing. But the real overarching thing, the decision makers here, this comes down from politics and how our fisheries decisions are made. And money influences politics here. And I've proven it. I've showed very specific examples. I've showed donations, direct donations to politicians, and then the bills and the things these politicians push in turn in order to benefit the fish dealers of North Carolina. And that's really the overarching thing there. These guys, they run businesses, and a business needs profit. They need more profit progressively over time. And at the same time, that drive for more profit causes these stocks to become depleted. And yet they can't really back off when they become depleted either. It's just not you run a business, so like you understand if somebody told you, hey, we need you to reduce your income by 50% next quarter. You're not going to take it well, right? It's not a good thing. So they do everything that they can. And
unfortunately though, right, we're talking about a public resource, right? This is something that, fishing in general, regardless of your status, it's a privilege, not just a right. We can't keep taking anything from what God has given us if we start depleting it to the point it gets down to zero, or to the point that like, well, what happened? There's nothing left. At some point, where does all this end? And I assume it's mostly money, and that's what I talked about in my video. Is very short decision making, meaning very short sighted, and a lot of just money decisions. Keep talking about that. I want to hear more about just this kind of how we got into this problem.
Absolutely. So the concept of public trust resource means that all the fish in all the waters across the entire United States belongs to every single man, woman, and child. It does not belong to businesses, but if you go back in the history of North Carolina, you have a lot of people who populate the coast. Now, some of these people just fish for sustenance. They just fish for food. They do not wish to make it their living. But the resources are so incredibly endless from their perspective. I've read old magazines and old books, and if you ever get bored one day, just go look at some of the really old, I can't remember if it was Field and Stream, but some of these magazines have run for 100 years. And you won't believe it. It sounds like the most insane fish stories you've ever heard if you just read a single standard fishing report. I have one from like somewhere in the 1930s, and a group that was taken out was actually livid that they only caught 40 drum on a half-day trip. I'm not making this up.
And they were probably all monster drum too.
They were livid. They didn't talk about the size, but they were absolutely distraught that they only caught 40 drum. This was their idea of a bad day, not a joke.
Yep.
So what happened then, we decided, as a whole, it was decided that some people should be able to go and to take those fish in large quantities with commercial gears and to sell those for the greatest benefit of the state. And a lot of our state, the infrastructure of our state only exists there because of these commercial fishing guys. They built these large infrastructures, and they built lots of the towns and cities that line our coast. It's a huge part of our heritage. But over time, eventually the stocks started to deplete. And, we've wiped out several of them. But at the same time, the fish dealers became very, very, very wealthy. Some of these people just make millions and millions and millions of dollars from doing this. And also in doing so, they became very politically powerful and very politically influential. And so through that time, as the stock started to deplete, as recreational fishing grew and became more popular, and more people also wanted to come and actually claim that piece that belongs to them, it became more and more necessary for this industry to defend itself. And we've gotten to the point now that we see here in North Carolina in 2024 that it's defended itself to the point that the general public, who are all supposed to be equal with everyone else, now has absolutely nothing when the commercial industry still has a season on southern flounder. And when you really get into the details of just how outrageous some of the things are, I mean, it's almost unbelievable. I know I talked to you before about one example that really got me fired up to begin with. I was fishing a local creek. I love speckled trout. It's my favorite fish. I do underwater video of them. I sometimes I just like to watch them. That's how much I like catching these fish and just sort of trying to understand and learn everything I can about them. Well, I was in the back of one of our creeks, and we've already been having a few rough years. There's definitely some overfishing that has happened here. And there was a guy that was gill netting back there. Right now, this is something that it is illegal in North Carolina. But when we call and try to get someone to come, the local fisheries enforcement guy, who everyone knows also holds a commercial license, basically says they don't have anyone to send and that we have to just leave him alone. We should stay away from him. And we keep on pushing and keep on pushing. And eventually someone from the Wildlife Resources Commission. So got to start off with how weird North Carolina is in that aspect, right? So we have two different agencies that run different waters. And this is another part of that political influence over time. So we have the DMF and the Marine Fisheries Commission, which they run the coastal fisheries, right? They handle all the commercial stuff and anybody who's fishing, basically in the salt and out. And then we have the Wildlife Resources Commission who manages inland. So eventually we got in touch with the Wildlife Resources Commission guy, and technically that is his area of authority. He actually did come out and ticket this individual, and the ticket that he got for setting nets in inland waters was $35. Whereas on any given night, he stands to gain, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, maybe depending on how good of a night he has. And it's known locally as the cost of doing business. So these guys, this is another law that has been kept this way. And if you looked at Florida, that's a felony. It's a $2,000 fine. They're going to confiscate the net. They're going to confiscate the boat. You might do some jail time. Mm-hmm. You're definitely probably looking at losing your commercial license. And that's the difference. The $35 fine versus felony law. They might even take your truck in Florida, from what I've been told. They might even take the truck that you use to haul the boat there. And the nets, it's almost like we're literally incentivizing this kind of behavior. And then people won't even come.
So to be clear, he was gill netting is still allowed in North Carolina, one of the last states, right? But you're talking about gill netting in these backcountry creeks, right? That was what was illegal about this.
Yeah. So
it's a $35 fine.
Yeah, I got to explain that for everybody, right? So even our commercial guys here in the state, they understand why they don't gill net the back of the creeks, right? There's absolutely no misconception about this. When the temperatures drop in winter in North Carolina, all of the fish either migrate out to the coast or they go into the very backs of the creeks. So you get this real heavy concentration of fish. And if you put a gill net in that, it will absolutely whack everything. So even our commercial fishermen recognize why it is good that we have this rule that you cannot gill net back there, because it hurts them in the future as well. But of course, just like anything else, you have a few bad apples who are willing to do this, and it has been defended, right? And the fish dealers know that this illegal stuff is happening too. And even if it doesn't represent a large part of their profit margin, it's in their interest to defend. If that's 3% or 4% or 5%, they're going to defend it. And our local enforcement arm has to know that it's happening too, because really from the months of like December, January, and February, if they are producing trout, which that's going to be for the guys hitting the back of the creeks, that's going to be their biggest months. That's when they're going to get the biggest hauls, because all those fish are going to pack into one tiny area and you can really hammer them, maybe 1,000 pounds of trout with a single net set. That's not an exaggerated number at all. I've got commercial fishing buddies who have showed me this before. So they can do that. They take it to the fish house. Anybody that looks at that, although you can't necessarily prove it, it's not like a court of law thing, but they should definitely know that they should be looking at that. And it's really not something that anybody's even trying to go after them for. It's really something that's just sort of overlooked, and we just kind of accept it like it's something that's always been that way. People grumble about it and they'll say, oh, well, we don't have the funding, we don't have the people to send out there. And it just goes on and on like that. So that's one little piece of sort of how over time these laws have developed in this way, where they just wildly favor the commercial side, right? You actually see illegal behavior being incentivized here. I mean, you think about it. If I only faced a $30 fine for speeding, no matter how fast I was going, I'm never going to be late for anything ever again.
Yeah.
I'm just going to drive 200 miles an hour.
And you don't even have, I assume, not a monetary incentive just to drive fast, to not be late, where we're talking about, hey, I can go out late at night. I know where the fish are. They're stacked up in this one little spot, and I can make $2,000. The absolute worst case is someone reports me and they fine me $35. That's a joke, right? I mean,
Absolutely. I mean, I just watched a video on YouTube the other day, and this was recent in Florida of a guy getting caught gill netting. And he had I can send you the video later if I think about it, but an atrocious amount of ladyfish. It was just an unreal amount of ladyfish. And he comes in, and of course, the wildlife officer splits them up, and their stories quickly are not matching up because the one guy is saying he went 9 miles offshore and set and caught all these ladyfish. And in Florida, there's a very serious punishment behind that, right? But these guys are still doing it down there. When they face very serious punishment. So you can imagine how rampant it is within North Carolina, where it's a $35 fine. And to top that off, this is probably one of the most unbelievable things about it, but it's absolutely true. It's horrible, is that the Wildlife Resources Commission was the one that issues that ticket for setting nets in the waters. And the Department of Marine Fisheries, and this is not a mistake. There have been attempts to fix this in the past, and they get shut down by politicians who are in the pockets of our fish house dealers. It is very simple how this happens. The details of it are complicated, but there is no interjurisdictional recognition, right? So if you can imagine having two counties that are right next to each other with police departments, and a guy commits some heinous crime, and he can just go to the county next to him, and that county says, "You're fine, dude. We don't recognize those guys." That's exactly what's happening here. So these guys they'll have these violations over and over and over again, and their commercial license doesn't get touched because DMF does not recognize wildlife. And that's one of our more recent developments, is the commission that is the Wildlife Resources Commission. They are openly opposing the Marine Fisheries Commission. So we have two state entities that are basically warring with each other. That's the level of ridiculousness that we are to in North Carolina right now, where they don't recognize one another's authority. In fact, during the 4-day flounder season that the Wildlife Resources Commission has just given us, and I have this recorded on my laptop, during that 4-day season, if you are in joint waters in possession of a flounder, you will be both legal and illegal at the same time, depending on which agency stops you. And that's it's a really strange thing. It's almost like the Marine Fisheries Commission is doing it out of spite, because there is law on the books that says they both manage joint waters. That's why it's called joint, right? But what it says is the Wildlife Resources Commission is supposed to have authority over hook and line, whereas the Marine Fisheries Commission, like DMF, the coastal guys, they're supposed to have authority over things like gigging, right? So gigging in this case would be commercial, or gill netting. They're supposed to have that authority, whereas WRC is supposed to have authority over hook and line. But we have been told directly by Marine Patrol, by this other enforcement arm, that yes, you will be ticketed if you are in joint waters. And I said, even though the Wildlife Resources Commission has said this is okay, and they said yes, even though they say it's okay, we are going to ticket you. So we've got it's a civil war. Almost. That's the point that it's gotten to now. And that season, just to really highlight this, the sheer numbers. So from the commercial side, we will have less than 500 people participating in commercial flounder this year that does have a season. On the recreational side, we have somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4 million people that have paid to fish the waters of North Carolina. They've paid to fish for flounder, and they will have absolutely nothing.
Kind of says it all right there. And on that story of the $35 ticket for the guy doing something illegal, you had shared something with me offline. What happens if you're just walking your dog that night around that area in that near a backcountry creek and happen to go stumble upon it and touch the net?
Yeah. So if I find an illegally set net in North Carolina and not pull it out of the water, not cut it into pieces or anything, if I just grab that float line and pick it up to see, how many fish is he catching in it, that is a felony. That is a felony. So the other is a $35 fine. But if you touch that gear, you don't even have to move it out of the water or anything. And I don't know if there's a worse charge for destroying it, but if you touch it, you have just committed a felony in North Carolina. So it is outrageous, the level of preferential treatment that the commercial side has been given.
Yeah, well, and that was in my little video. I talked about that. I mentioned three things, and one of them was that equity issue. And if you just dropped someone who's never fished in their life, and you just told them, hey, what you just said earlier, you got 500 people here, let's just call it 1 million over here. They're not allowed to catch anything, even though they paid for this public resource. And these 500 people, not only can they hit their quota, their bycatch is somehow just, it's a buy. It's not counted. And if they take some of it home, that part's not counted and put it in their freezer. Like, it just seems like these rules are. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. They're not even archaic. They're flat out nuts. Talk about that in terms of the bycatch, or what happens with the trawler, or any sort of net where you could be millions of flounder over the year, and that stuff just is. I guess we won't count that.
So, but before I get to the bycatch, I'll talk on the other point first. So, this year, for anyone who holds a commercial license, and it's a really important thing to note to how this is kind of twisted over time to purely personal gain and not even truly looking after the markets, to truly just what people personally want. So if I hold a commercial license this year, and in fact, if I would like to, I can go on Marketplace and I can go pay someone $2,200 or $2,400 or whatever he's going to charge to lease that license for this year. And they are actively advertising it as like, you can go flounder fish now.
And that's legal?
That is legal. That is legal to lease it to anyone. I don't have to be an experienced commercial fisherman, and I can go out and run 800 yards of gill net, right? Nothing bad could possibly happen from that. And I say that because horrible things have happened many times from inexperienced guys getting this. There was an area up north where I saw just the most horrific field of floating overslot reds ever. Because some guy had leased a license, didn't know what he was doing, and set in an area where our commercial guys and the local guides had an unspoken understanding that, like, hey, this giant wad of 2,000 or 3,000 overslot reds is the lifeblood of the guide community, and it is worthless to the commercial sector. But he sat in the middle of this and just killed astronomical amounts of these fish, and it was inadvertent, but the guy didn't know what he was doing.
Wow.
But point being, so this is totally legal. And mind you, this guy, the person who holds the commercial license, in many, many cases, so for a long time, we sort of lost control over the licensing. Anyone could transfer a license to anyone. And so you could just go buy one for about $1,200. But what happens now, these guys will pay $400 a year to keep their license active. And then you can actually just lease it. You don't have to do anything. So I can make $2,200, $2,400 a year, or even more in some cases, depending on what that license is, with some of them being worth millions. And I'm actually selling you the right to access a resource that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you just as much as it belongs to me. But in North Carolina, you don't have that ability unless I have leased you this. So I can make money for doing nothing by selling something that doesn't belong to me. And it's real and it's crazy. Well, it gets even worse than that, because once I have leased that license, so we have that allocation in North Carolina, right? It's 70% commercial and 30% rec, which is why rec is completely closed because of past overages. Because, we don't, if you get a 2-week season, you don't control how many fish are catching by quota. However, the commercial side, anytime you take a fish to the fish house, it's counted in pounds, and that goes against their quota. So when I get a hold of this commercial license, I can go out, and this is totally legal in North Carolina. I can take an unlimited number of flounder. This year, when 1.4 million people are not allowed a single one, I can take an unlimited number. I can throw them in the back of my truck. I can take them home and put them in my freezer, not sell a single fish. And this is completely legal. And the biggest problem with it is that not a single one of those fish is actually going against the commercial allocation either. So that's one of the first big things where we have this huge disparity where those fish are not being counted.
What percentage, didn't you tell me, what percentage of commercial licenses are not even? 60%.
So only less than half of the commercial fishermen sell a single fish at all. So what the majority of
that's reported at least.
That's reported. Yeah. Of course, we got guys selling them out of the back of trucks too. But it's 60% of the commercial licenses that are out there. And I'm sure it's not every single person that's doing this, but a lot of them. And I know several of these people too. Sometimes they're guides and they want to be able to have their guided trips open longer. And then sometimes it's just rec guys, like guys that I know that are just like me, who just really love to flounder gig, and they want to fill freezers, and they didn't want to have that limit. So they went and got these commercial license back years ago, so they didn't have to abide by the recreational limit. And that's all it is. You've just bought this privilege that no one else can have. And now it's come to the point of where you're literally like royalty. It's like hunting in the king's woods. Like you have to get permission, right? But it doesn't belong to these people, right? It's just a license, and it has just been skewed over time by this overarching political influence of the fish dealers. So, and that's not anywhere near the worst part of it. So most definitely the elephant in the room, something that we still do in North Carolina, which is illegal in every single state in the United States. It's illegal in Mexico, is inshore trawling. And if you just Google most destructive form of fishing ever invented, you will find bottom trawling. It ranks above dynamite. It ranks above poison. Because it destroys the bottom in very large areas, and it destroys all of our juvenile fish. And within the trawl fishery, they actually discard dead about the same exact amount of flounder by weight that the total recreational allocation adds up to. So I did a very detailed video on this, breaking down the numbers exactly. And this is scientific research that came from the DMF to show these numbers. And when you extrapolate it out, it's funny because it's almost the exact same weight that the Marine Fisheries Commission, so this is that, sort of commercially controlled group, has allowed the 1.3 million people to have. So the total amount that they've allowed them to have is actually being thrown away dead by the trawls, but that weight is not counted at all against the commercial quota. For some reason, we act like it just doesn't exist. It doesn't happen at all. And there's actually a very significant amount are discarded from crab pots too, which, I mean, nobody has a problem with a crab pot. Obviously, crab pots are not destroying the bottom environment, but we would like to count every fish in a way that's equitable. If we're really trying to recover it, and if you want a lot of people to do their part, that's another big problem we're running into now. If you go on Facebook, you'll find every other person's like, I'm going to take what I can get, man. Because you really get this sort of vigilante mentality when you feel like you're getting screwed over. So now people start to feel righteous in just going and taking it. And that's obviously, that's not going to get us back to where we need to be. No. It's going to get us to the worst possible outcome. If everybody has that mentality, then we may very well, stand a chance of pushing these fish down really, really far. And that's another argument I often have with people. Anytime you bring up the need for management of a stock, people instantly think like, oh, they're saying that these fish are endangered. And it's not the case. That's really something that's critical that everybody needs to know out there. So in order to be able to take the most fish possible, you got to leave about half of them in the water. So if you waited until you're not catching fish, it's way, way, way too late. And a lot of people don't get that, and it's understandable too. On the surface, like you've always caught fish, and you go out and you still catch fish. I'm sure for myself and for you, there's never going to be a day where I can't go out there and catch fish. That's just, it's not a thing, right? I mean, I might have a bad day every once in a while,
sure. Yeah.
But it would be highly unusual. But for a lot of average people, many of our fish stocks are depleted so much. Guys go out on the piers and stuff, and it's absolutely nothing like what it was just 10, 15 years ago. Because this is all kind of, it's really snowballing. Flounder is just the most recent event. Flounder didn't used to be the most valuable fish commercially, so it's really only been under pressure for about around 50 years, something like that, 40, 50 years. So yeah, I mean, the trawls are definitely the biggest part of it. Yeah. And we just don't count it. We pretend like it's not there, and I've never had a problem. So our DMF is generally a bunch of fisheries scientists, right? Now, some of them definitely have some commercial sympathies, right? But they also have legislation that guides them. And it says their decision-making process must account for food production, right? So anytime they make a decision, they must put food production first. So their hands are really kind of tied in it. But I've never had a problem getting information out of them. They're actually very forthcoming in North Carolina. They're very good people, a lot of very good people. Until I got to this. Until I got to the trawl issue. And it's like they won't even talk about it.
Tight lips.
What I was told, I mean, Well, the governor can fire these people, and they can fire the director for any reason or no reason at any time. And it's happened many times in the past where you have the North Carolina Fisheries Association, right? And all this is a lobbying group of primarily fish dealers, right? So a small group of generally wealthy, politically powerful people in North Carolina. Now, not all of them, right? But the actual power comes from the wealthy within them, obviously. They have just voted together to fire the director that's meant to keep them in line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a prison where the prisoners can just vote to fire the warden. This is never going to be a system that can possibly work as long as this can happen. You can't have control over the person who's meant to regulate you. You just can't. There should definitely be some kind of level of being able to say like, hey, this guy's really not doing their jobs. But it shouldn't just be like, hey, we don't like them. We don't like what they're doing. And that's what it has been in North Carolina for a very, very long time.
It's and I think, for some people, you might see the headlines, that the limits in North Carolina are down or to zero, or the trout's down. And, your initial thought, because you just think people are good and that rules are good, that, oh, this is a conservation issue. And the more I dove into it, I'm sure you would agree with me here. I was like, this is not a conservation issue at all. This is a money and allocation issue. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? I mean, these guys aren't talking about conservation for the most part at all behind the scenes. This is all about how much money we make in, and this is about how much can we get of this resource. It's all about allocation of money.
I mean, it absolutely is, and it isn't. So that's definitely the driving factor. And of course it is, because you're talking about a business. You're talking about businessmen, and they have to make decisions like that. It's not even evil. It's capitalism. It's the nature of the beast. So, I mean, you can imagine if I'll often make the analogy of if you had a field and you couldn't really see what everybody else was doing in that field, but in that field, little tiny gold nuggets would grow, right? And from them, more little tiny gold nuggets would sprout. And everybody knows that we can all go out and take one every day and we'll be fine, right? Run that experiment somewhere with 100 people where they can't see what the others are doing. And I guarantee you it doesn't make it a week before it's all gone. Mm-hmm. Because it literally only takes one or two greedy people. And the issue with that is those few greedy people are actually going to become very wealthy. And they're going to use that wealth to influence the decision-making around how that gold is now taken. And that's exactly the issue that we deal with in North Carolina and throughout the entire country. If you know, do you know about northern cod? So one of the fisheries in the world.
We did a podcast about that, a year or so ago. Yep.
Did you know they're opening it?
When?
You should Google it. They're opening it like next year. They're opening it. It is just barely above the threshold. It's been closed for 30 years, something like that. It is literally peaked barely above the threshold. And they're opening it. So the massive trawls, right? The massive trawls. And this is a fishery that is unfathomable. I think in the 60s, gosh, I don't want to misquote the number, but it was something like 168,000 tons a year was what was coming out of that fishery. And they fished them to the point that, they'd already seen all the fish get small. And they had all the same excuses that they always have that, oh, well, they're migrating, or, it's something else that's going on. Something's making them push around. And, by the time they closed it, you got down the road to, it's been 20 years later, and you even have some of those captains, some of the same guys who were in there trying to kill politicians for closing and are saying like, yeah, man, we should have done something so much sooner. And it's just, you really get blinded when it's your life. Right? Like we just cannot make good, logical, removed decisions when we're talking about losing our livelihood. And that's exactly what our Marine Fisheries Commission is. So another great thing to highlight here. So, and I do like the fact that we have a commission and that we don't have legislators making all these decisions for us, right? Because legislators don't tend to have enough time to really engage with a complex issue like fisheries. So I don't really want them to making decisions. I do want, people who fish, or at least people who are aware of the science and in depth, of how this all works and sort of how all the money flows and stuff, because it's important, massively important for economically for the state of North Carolina and obviously Florida as well. I think we're right behind you guys as far as the number of anglers who access it. But the way our Marine Fisheries Commission is made up is you have 3 commercial seats, and these guys are actually required. They're not just there to represent the commercial industry. These guys are required that they have 50% of their income from commercial fishing, right? Even though at the beginning of every Marine Fisheries Commission meeting, they read this thing, and it's part of pre-existing legislation that says you cannot make decisions on any commission in North Carolina if you have a conflict of interest. So these guys swear that they have no conflict of interest, and they're literally about to vote on something that may cost them 50% of their annual income. And yet they do it. And it's a farce. And even on the recreational side, at least one of those people must have 50% of their income from it. So that's usually a guide, and in this case, like our guides but there's still a few old school guides who are like, we kill everything we touch, but we're really turning a corner in North Carolina. We're already starting to see the release over 20 movement seems to have really made a difference, and it's caught on with a lot of people. And our speckled trout has exploded in some areas of North Carolina. I mean, and the DMF attests to that too. That we have more speckled trout now than we have recorded history at any point. However, there are so few fish left to fish for that, one of the creeks I go to on a Monday probably has 25 boats in it and 17 kayaks on a Monday. Yeah, not like a holiday Monday, just like a regular weekday. So those fish are overfished as well. And that's really where we get into danger. Every time we go down another species, all the pressure shifts, right? So we're not entirely with flounder because so many people just love to gig. So with flounder, we did just truly lose an enormous amount of money that was coming to the coast. And really nobody knows who those victims are though, because it's spread out everywhere. Yeah. Whether it's a grocery store that somebody went to, or a restaurant, a gas station, people will bring their families down because they want to gig for a whole weekend. So anything along the beach that the wife and kids go to, but they don't know why that money's gone, right? They don't know that $250 million just vanished. That's another great point. So when we had a flounder season, right? So when we talk about the allocation of 70 to commercial and then 30 to recreational, when we had a season and it was just wide open, right? So people could when we only had limits, but pre-allocation, the recreational fishery took about 10% of the fish and had about $250 million in sales impacts. The commercial fishery took 90% and had about $18 million in sales impacts. So you want to talk about decisions made in the greater good for the state versus just the benefit of a very few wealthy, influential people. It's not even a conversation to be had. So to say that they should still get this number, and you could have argued it for a long time, really, because from the recreational perspective, I just need the potential, right? I just need the potential to catch fish. So a big part of why the rec side only caught 10% of the fish was really just a lack of availability, right? Because the commercial pressure was so high that you just wouldn't be able to run across them, but you had the potential, right? That's what fishing is, right? You have the opportunity to go and catch, right? And as long as you have the opportunity, you're not going to make the full amount of money. Like if people show up to flounder fish and they catch 40 flounder, they're probably going to want to come back, and maybe they're going to want to come back soon. That's definitely how it works with speckled trout, which is also it's sort of how the problem arises too. When it's good, you tell your buddies and you go back more often, but that's also where the value is at in it. And as long as we do that responsibly, we can really maximize, the value in that stuff. So that's, speckled trout's the next on the list, right? I don't know if you've seen that video, but
the one from inside the meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I watched that on the Anglers Right Alliance, and I was just like, oh my gosh.
That's jaw dropping, isn't it? It's jaw dropping. So it's almost the perfect opposite of flounder. And this is where you see that each time we talk about something new, the rules just change. There is no framework. It's not about the greatest benefit to the state or the most value or who has traditionally taken the most. That was the excuse with flounder. Commercial said, oh, well, we've always taken 90%, so we need the largest cut, right? And that plays pretty well in a room. You're like, yeah, okay, fine, right? But then it gets to trout, and it's the opposite, and they say, no, we want more. So we're in the room to talk about making the reductions to not wipe these fish out. And they say, well, we only take 10%. You got to take all the cuts, right? And for anybody that wants to see that, go over to the page, the YouTube channel, Fishing with Brewski, and look at that. It's one of the more recent videos, the Speckled Trout Advisory Committee. It is, I understand people often don't believe that this is true, because for a long time, I didn't believe that it was true, because you kind of have to see it firsthand to see just how wildly out of control our state is. But I do think we're headed in a very good direction. People are really starting to wake up. And obviously, we have the ability to fix this. That's the big thing.
Let's talk about that. What is the solution to all this?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as a perfect solution, it's a very fluid thing. Florida's not without problems. No state is without problems within fisheries, because it's dynamic, right? We never know exactly how people are going to behave in any particular area. Sometimes we deal with environmental issues, or, the fact that the ocean's consistently getting warmer in some areas is kind of changing things. But the elephant in the room, most definitely, is that we got to get politics out of fisheries. You got to get politics out. You got to have some kind of a framework that is based around science, right? And really creating a system where we actually have equity, right? Where we actually have equity. And the only way you're going to have that is if everybody truly is treated equally. You cannot continue to hold people above other people. And in order for us to do that, we've got to completely overhaul our Marine Fisheries Commission. It's either got to be completely changed, the legislation that created it has to be completely changed, or it just has to be pulled in under the Wildlife Resources Commission. So we already have another state agency that has a great track record of actually recovering stocks, because they are worried about the stocks and they're not worried about quarterly profits. So they've done a great job with recovering the turkeys. I was just listening to some stuff through them the other day. And then of course there's a few things that are questionable from them as well. But when you look at our Marine Fisheries Commission, it was established in 1997. And since that time, it has not recovered a single species. So stripers, flounder, redfish has actually recovered quite a bit in North Carolina, but that actually didn't come from our Marine Fisheries Commission. That came from the overarching federal stuff. And that's the only population that's actually grown from being in trouble. And depending on where you're at, the redfish are not doing that great, right? But then I don't know if you've seen any of the videos from up around the Outer Banks and stuff, but some of that up there is pretty wild. But I mean, blue crabs, striped mullet, these are two fisheries that are over 99% commercial. Both of those are in trouble, right? So even things that have no recreational impact whatsoever at all, that are not having environmental problems that are affecting those stocks, they still run into the same problems, because there's simply not enough fish there to feed the world, right? And as long as you have guys who are worried about this quarter's profits making the decisions, you're going to continue to go down this road of just more and more and more reduction. And then you're going to finally get down there to a point where you say, okay, we have to close it outright. And then it's going to take forever to recover. It's like northern cod, like we talked about with northern cod. It's going to take forever to recover.
Yeah, decades, yeah.
And then by the time it recovers, everybody has sort of forgotten, right? And that's kind of like, that's why I say it's really cyclical. So the biggest thing we're doing, though, as far as a solution, is really spreading the word. That's the biggest first step that we have, is letting people know just how outrageous this is. Mm-hmm. And then the second part, letting people know that a tiny group of people in North Carolina has controlled this system because they are actively involved. Like, nobody wants to be political. I hate politics. Everybody hates politics. But politics is deciding your future right now. Yeah. Right. And if you do not become political, then you are going to get politicked. You're going to have the short end of the stick. And that's what's happened. But we have over 1 million anglers in North Carolina. And if people start to engage and they start to let their legislators know, and we get informed and we get organized, I mean, we can decide that's 1 in 11 people. It's 1 in 11 people. We can decide who every single sitting politician is. So we absolutely have the power to do that. I started a Facebook page called the Anglers' Rights Alliance. We have CCA North Carolina here as well, which they have a lawsuit pending against the state. And given all the things I've just told you, their lawsuit is basically saying like our fisheries management system has failed. We have a constitutional right in North Carolina to harvest fish, and that constitutional right has been robbed from us. Right. So I don't know what judge is going to say that's not a valid statement. You know what I'm saying? There's so much more evidence. There's so many more things that I could tell you about. Obviously, we don't have time for that today, but it gets so much worse than even just the things I've told you.
And sadly, I had one of the head guys from CCA, I'm blanking on his name. I had him on this same podcast. I want to say it was 4 years ago, because one of our employees, Wyatt, was he's listed on there as one of the defendants on the thing, or the plaintiffs or whatever. And it's sad that it's taken 4 years and they still haven't even seen a judge yet. Wow. Is it this? I assume it's the same lawsuit, right? That's been around that long.
I'm assuming. I'm actually not sure on that. There's been a number of lawsuits over the years. So this one is due to come to I don't understand the whole judicial system perfectly well, but it is due to come to some kind of decision around April. And there is a huge aspect of having the election, right? So everything's political, and every law is just what we make it. And as long as we have these people who have always controlled the system continue to control the system, things can go badly for us. But depending on who becomes is it the state prosecutor? Yeah. State prosecutor, state district attorney, whatever that position is, depending on who is placed in that position, they could even appeal this to go to the Supreme Court, and that could delay it years more.
Even more, yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's all political, right? So really getting involved, getting informed first, so that you know what you're talking about, and then getting involved, emailing your legislators, calling your legislators, telling them that North Carolina needs change, and obviously grouping together. A lot of these guys making these decisions, these are state legislators. These guys live down the road from me, right? They live down the road from you. Anybody that's in North Carolina, they live right down the road from you. They're regular people. They have regular jobs. I think our House members only make like $10,000 a year, right? So if you apply pressure to them, they're regular people. You can go to them and talk to them and apply pressure. You can help them get elected, or you can make sure that their opponent gets elected. You can absolutely change this. We can make this anything we want it to be. And of course, I'm sure you know this from a lot of people, if you know any of the states who have sort of gone through this transition, very, very quickly, you see massive, massive recovery in some of these fisheries. Mm-hmm. When you finally start to do the right thing. I can't imagine what we'll see in North Carolina. We have what I think is this second largest inshore body of water, maybe on the planet. And we're very close to the Gulf Stream. North Carolina is really special in that. Mm-hmm. And our entire, the Pimlico Sound is very shallow too. So it just makes this huge, incredible estuary. And I think we should have one of the best fisheries in the entire country. We still do for redfish, because it's one of the few fish that's protected. Mm-hmm. We have this incredible old drum fishery.
Yeah, the world record was caught there in North Carolina, right?
Yep, it sure was. Well, that fish was like 98 pounds.
Yeah, it was 92 or 94 or something crazy.
I think it's 98, because I've been to the pier near where that fish was caught.
Yeah.
So yeah, we still catch them. It's I try not to pick fun at the Florida guys too much, but I'll see people post all the time, and they're posting a 33-inch redfish and they're calling it a bull, and we're like, kind of look down our nose and British Carolina over that, because it's like, if it's not 40 inches, it's not a bull, man.
That's funny.
But it's just, it's the difference in the region, right?
Sure.
So, but we do regularly catch. We'll get them up to the 50-inch range. It's not unusual, but that's one of those few. And that was protected outside of the decision making of North Carolina. Unfortunately, and that's where you can see the one fish that has actually done relatively well is the red drum, right? Which, given they're still commercially harvested, but there is a pretty tight restriction on how they can do that, how much they can take. So Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So, and of course, another solution, the CCA lawsuit's huge. I think they're pretty well funded. But the CCA has been in the fight for a long time. They've been an absolutely critical aspect to this. And if the lawsuit, by some miracle, if the lawsuit is not successful, then we don't stop pushing. We will form more groups. Like I said, I have the Anglers Rights Alliance. It's right now it's just a Facebook page. I'm really torn because I really always want to keep the moral high ground here. I want to make absolutely certain that I don't end up starting something that becomes the thing that I set out to destroy. Right. So as soon as I start to, if you get money involved, and it changes, right? So right now I come to people and I'm doing this. I have absolutely no financial gain whatsoever at all. I have nothing to gain, right? So people can trust me. If I turn it into a 501c or a political action committee, I feel like, I don't know. I don't like money, right? I feel like money is the whole reason that all this bad crap has happened, right?
But you need either money or voters to make changes, which is what's sad.
Exactly. And as we go forward, I will do what is necessary, right? So, and that's what I tell people, you can have my fish. I don't care if I ever catch another one. I love fishing so much, but I do not care if I ever catch another one. But looking through all the history, knowing all the things that I know, I've got my boy up here on the wall behind me, right? Like you can have mine, you're gonna have to kill me to take his. Right. And I will absolutely die on that hill. I really want to make sure that the future generations still have something. And if you just look at our history in any state, you look at the limits, the restrictions, it's almost always slowly downhill over time. So we really have to tighten up, and we can even see the short-term gains from that too. Like while we're still alive, it could still benefit me, of course. But that's not my primary focus, right? We're in it for the future. And if we worry about the future, then we'll be taken care of in the present as well, right? As long as we're planning for the future. So,
but this is great. I learned a ton on this interview. So thank you. And if you guys want to know a whole lot more, make sure to subscribe to his channel. That was, where I first really started learning about some of these issues. CCA has a great podcast as well that they've talked quite a bit about it. But yeah, Fishing with Brewski is his channel, and then the Anglers Rights Alliance on Facebook, I joined that as well. Another great place to hear what's going on. There's a lot of smart people in that Facebook group, and some that are showing up to meetings, right, and coming back and reporting back on what's happening, and then ultimately, get involved. Most all of these meetings, they're accessible to the public one way or the other. Even in Florida, I love what Florida's done. They realize not everyone can leave in the middle of the day or can't make a 4 p.m. meeting. And so they have a way right online where you can go submit anything you want about any topic that they're talking about. Like for us, it's, usually snook or trout or redfish and the inshore. Flounder doesn't get mentioned as much here in Florida. But for the other 3 species, I could literally go on there right before a committee meeting and put as a voter and as an angler who has a license, I can say whatever I want. And that is now part of the public domain. Your vote counts. If you just complain about it on Facebook, not so much. So there are ways to do it, even if you can't actually attend a meeting. And I would encourage all of you to find those ways. I know you talk about on your channel as well. At the end of all your videos, say, hey, here's exactly where to go to find your politicians in your area. Here's exactly what you want to say to them. And I think you're right. If we all unite and get fired up about this, as I said, it either takes money or voters. And just in your state, having 1 point something million people, not even including spouses and family members and friends that would probably get behind and say, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That's a lot of voters. That can make a ton of change.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's very difficult to get people to move though. It's very difficult. If they could just see how easy it would actually be if we moved together. You can imagine if you were a legislator and you can't even answer your phone or return all the messages you get in an election year, you're going to want it to go away. There's not going to be any amount of pressure that you're just going to start saying yes.
Yeah.
As long as people give you specific directives. And that's what goes back to that first step. You really got to get informed, and you do have to sort of work with your peers and have an idea of what makes the most sense to do. And that's getting educated is how you unite.
Yep.
And then it just takes a little bit of action. We really like phone calls a lot better than emails, because emails are easy to ignore. And that's the default of a legislator, right? Don't think that, I gave them a call one time and they didn't call me back, so it's hopeless. No, I called one of my legislators 6 times before he got in touch with me. And now I have his private cell phone number and he answers when I call it. So
that's awesome. I love hearing that.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's, again, they're just regular people, I mean, you can find out where they work. Like, I'm not suggesting that you should do that.
Yeah. But
but
it is easy to find.
It's possible. Depending on how much you want to make change, it's right there at your fingertips. It's simply a matter of, I mean, we're a country that came about through a revolution. I'm sure it seemed impossible to fight the King of England, but people decided that it was time, and they just stood up and they did it. Not to say that it was necessarily easy, but it was relatively simple, right? Like, what needs to be done. That this is unfair. You have a government that does not represent the best interest of the vast majority of its people. I mean, literally, we're talking about 0.2% of the people in North Carolina are getting all of the allowed flounder in North Carolina this year.
Wow.
0.2%. It's probably less than that, actually.
Yeah,
and it's not really, and it's not really, it's not them that it's being done for. It's a much smaller fraction of the people who run the fish houses that are making the majority of the money. So that dockside price this year for the commercial guys is going to be less than $1 million. But if you track that all the way down to the end of the road, that fish is worth $5 million. So yeah, the guys at the bottom, they're not making the decision. They're not even making all the money. So it's even a smaller percentage than that. And they absolutely cannot stand up against numbers. All the money in the world is not going to stand up against the votes.
Mm-hmm.
People get informed and get active. Call your legislators. It's easy to look them up. Sometimes you got to be a little persistent, but I do it at least once a week. I have a reminder. I have a reminder on my phone, and it pops up, and I say, "Hey, what's going on?" And you push for very specific changes. And with us, we want the Marine Fisheries Commission gone. It's a complete, total, and utter failure. And we want inshore trawling gone. And there's absolutely no way that if I go and get a commercial license, I should be able to go take 1,000 pounds of flounder and put it in a freezer at home when nobody else can take one. So those are the 3 big things we're asking for right now. And I don't think it's unreasonable, Don't think any of that's unreasonable. I think it's all very reasonable.
I love it, man. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Fishing with Brewski, the Paul Revere of the North Carolina recreational anglers here, ringing the bell. Well, dude, thank you again. This was really, really great. And please, everyone, subscribe to his channel, join the alliance there on Facebook, and get involved. I'm sure we will have more on this as it happens. And stay tuned for the CCA thing. It sounds like it's still going to be dragged out a little bit longer, but from what I know about that lawsuit, this is, I mean, it's pretty big deal for the state of North Carolina. So thank you, my friend. And for everyone else, we appreciate you sticking around. Any questions, thoughts, we'll make sure to put this over on saltstrong.com. And at the bottom, you see a place to leave comments. Love to hear any and all thoughts, suggestions, etc. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. Find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fishing in our soul.